Alrighty, hi everyone, and welcome to How to Become an Expert Federal Grant RFP Reviewer with Rachel Werner. This spotlight is being recorded and slides will be shared afterwards, so keep your eyes peeled for a follow-up email later in case you want to review anything from today. If you have any questions throughout, we ask that you put 3 pound signs in front of your question when popping it in the chat, just like I'm putting here in the chat right now, just to ensure that it stands out and we don't miss it. If your question isn't answered in the presentation, do not worry. We're going to be keeping track of questions asked throughout, and we'll try our best to address them during the Q&A at the end. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Deanna, and I'm the Partnerships Marketing Manager at Instrumentl, and I will be your host for today. In case it's your first time here, this free grant workshop is an Instrumentl partner webinar. These are collaborations between Instrumentl and our partners to provide free educational workshops for grant professionals. Our goal with these workshops is very much in line with our overall goal at Instrumentl, and that is to support grant writers and nonprofits in order to get the best tools, insights, and expertise that they need to win more funding with ultimately less work. Lastly, be sure to stick around for today's entire presentation. At the end, we're going to be sharing with you some really exciting freebie resources, many more details to come after Rachel's presentation. Now, with all of that housekeeping out of the way, I'm so excited to introduce everyone to Rachel Werner. Rachel is the owner and CEO of RBW Strategy and is experienced in the public sector manager, or she's an experienced public sector manager and consultant. Sorry, that was a bit of a mouthful for me. She has over 17 years of experience leading strategic change in both grantee and grantor organizations and has supported and worked in the federal government, nonprofit, and corporate sectors. She has a clear understanding of the needs and goals of each industry and the driving forces behind executive decisions. Rachel currently holds a PMP certification designated by the Grant Professionals Association as a certified grant professional and has a grants management certification, has obtained a secret security clearance, and has taken additional training in fundraising, grants management, and program administration. All to say, we are so lucky to be learning about reviewing federal grant RFPs today with Rachel. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us. And with that, you can take it away.
All right. Well, thank you. Nice to meet everybody virtually. And, you know, as we all know, federal grants have become quite the hot topic over the past few years. And so when you quickly look at this, it might seem, wait a second, you know, are we going to serve as peer reviewers? No. What this is really just an overview of when you get that funding opportunity announcement, how can we look at it more critically? How can we evaluate it to determine the go, no go? How can we think about this more strategically? Because, you know, as Deanna shared, you know, I come in as a post-award compliance specialist on every pre-award project. So I'm always trying to think through, you know, how could we be better suited for this opportunity and thinking about some of the challenges that we could potentially face. So, you know, I'm always trying to put that hat on when I look at these various different funding opportunity announcements. Okay, next slide. So, you know, I think you've already started doing this, your name, your organization, and what do you do related to grant management? And the grant management could be, you know, pre and post award, because sometimes, as sure many of you have multiple hats. So some of you probably are writing the grants and some of you might be managing, some might be doing both. So just curious to kind of get a sense and pulse of, you know, who's there. And I do it all. Yeah, I'm not surprised. Okay, next slide. So, you know, I already know a little bit about me. I'm based in Maryland. So for those of you who are familiar with the area, I live in Montgomery County, just north of DC. And, you know, I've always been an East Coast person, lived in New York and then moved down to Maryland. And so now work with a lot of clients across the country and not just in the East Coast. Next slide. So we're going to talk a little bit about, you know, what exactly what are the learning objectives? You know, what do we want to cover today? So first, we're going to talk a little bit about federal grants. You know, why federal grants? Why are we talking about them now? And kind of give a little bit of a snapshot of where we are from federal landscape using some USA spending information. And also, Deanna's going to lead us in a overview of how to find federal grant opportunities using Instrumentl. And I can tell you that we have found some ourselves. Our team loves Instrumentl. And so it's a great place for finding private and federal opportunities. And then we're going to really get into things about the RFP reviewers checklist and looking at a couple of different RFP examples and highlighting things that you can look into them a little bit further so that you can take that information when you do your own RFP, or there's a lot of different terminology for them as we'll review. And then also reviewing a go, no go assessment to figure out the right fit, and then some key takeaways. And I am always open to answering any questions. So you'll see me pause throughout this presentation. And so feel free to put them in the chat box because I do want to feel like your questions are being answered. And I always leave time at the end, so like 10 minutes or so, to see if there's any open questions. Okay, next slide. All right, so why federal grants and why right now? Why is this a topic that we're going to be focusing on? And I don't think any of this will surprise you. Next slide. So something I do want to know, in addition to learning more about you as a person within your organization and what your role is, also understanding, are you new to federal grant seeking? Because sometimes people might have been thrown into in the abyss, and sometimes nope, you're an old hat, and like this, you're a veteran in this space. So I see that there's a mix of yes, new, and some not so new. So so it's a good mix of different skill level. Next one. Okay, so what's the urgency? So we're going to kind of take a snapshot of usaspending.gov, which is a great website to gather information on about different organizations, and is a means to kind of increase the level of transparency about how federal funds are distributed. So this should give you a snapshot. So the assistance listings indicates, all the different opportunities that are out there. And, as you can see, which assistance listings supported the response to COVID-19, and you can see how much outlays there have been, related. And this is specifically grants, but that number is going beyond $1 trillion, at this point, when you involve other different kinds of funding. So you can see all the different obligations and outlays that have gone on, over the past couple of years in response to the pandemic. So there's been a huge amount of awards, and not only to organizations and agencies that you would necessarily expect, but also newer ones that are coming into the fold. So it's important to kind of see both sides of that, that it's not just organizations that have been traditional federal recipients, but also some that are newer. Next slide. So as you can see, if you look at 2021 specifically, pandemic related grant spending increased tremendously, and those are not surprising, is related to the CARES Act and ARPA spending, and also CSLRF, which might be a familiar acronym to you, which is coronavirus state and local relief funding. And there's also IIJA funding, which is for investment. The acronym is escaping me right now, but there's other specific funding related to pandemic that has gone for various different types of initiatives for helping vulnerable populations, also infrastructure, a lot of money going towards that, building up not just, our public infrastructure, but also, broadband and things of that nature. So there's been a lot of funding in all different kinds of areas. Okay, next slide. So what does this mean for you? So basically, what I have seen just from working in this space for the past few years is that, more funding means there's more opportunities. And so a lot of clients are coming out of the woodwork and saying, yep, we want to jump into this like federal grant bandwagon. We want to get into the mix. We want to see if we're eligible for these opportunities. We want to go after the funding. So that's great. Now there's more opportunities to kind of level the playing field and allow those who might not have been traditional funding recipients to be eligible for different kind of opportunities as a partner or as a lead applicant, but that also means a level of preparedness. And so just how do you kind of manage the competition? How do you collaborate with these different partners, and really thinking about the strategic priorities for your organization and seeing, like, are they a good fit? Are these opportunities going to support these various different priorities and initiatives that we have and that we want to accomplish over the coming years? So, I mean, it's a great way to think about establishing more impact and benefiting your community in a much broader way, but there are some considerations, there's some strings that we want to think about. Next slide. So when do federal grants make sense? When do you think this is the right time to go after them? Well, one, you want to make sure that there's a specific project or concept in mind. So as you are probably well aware, like, federal funding does not just go to, oh, we're going to give, I call it the golden ticket funding, which is general operating support. So it's not, there's always some restrictions. There's always money that has to go for a specific purpose for direct support. And so making sure that there's an understanding and a clear awareness of how those funds can support those particular initiatives, those particular cost categories. And also thinking about those partnerships, because partnerships is really how the true sense of impact can really make a difference in your community and how you're building that out. And also thinking about the opportunities themselves, and, are there any that come up that seem like they're a good fit and that you meet the eligibility requirements? And the last one that I think is really important is thinking about this from a post-award perspective, is, thinking about from a compliance standpoint and managing the funding. So when you administer that grant, do you have the resources? Do you have the capacity to be able to manage that funding if you get it? Because sometimes, especially if you have a smaller budget, that could be a huge impact. And are you able to handle that load if you get it? Next slide. So as I mentioned before, there's a lot of terminology. So RFP is request for proposal. That's a very common term, but there's other things that you might be familiar with, like grant guidance, funding opportunity announcement, or FOA, notice of funding opportunity, NOFO, notice of funding announcement, NOFA. Then there's request for application to RFA, broad agency announcement, BAA. Each agency kind of refers to these terms, and so they could mean something very similar. So, so just so you know, in case you see that term and it's not something that appears common to you, but just know that, as we know with federal government, there's a lot of acronyms. Next slide. And so this is where I think the magic happens, because a lot of times people come to us when they're talking about application development. So number 2, but I think that number 1 is the most critical stage, because that's when you really do the planning. That's when you do the research. That's when you really put the put all the understanding in place of how you can be successful in this opportunity. Next one. And so, I think that it's with the whole federal grants process, it's easy that you could feel overwhelmed, especially if you've never gone after federal grants or if you've never administered a federal grant. And that's why that preparation, that research phase is really important, because that's where you really understand who on your team is going to help support you and how you're going to work together to administer the grant. Next one. Okay, so this, I'm going to hand it off to Deanna to kind of go through, how do we use Instrumentl? Let us say that you put your priorities up there and you're going to start looking at different opportunities. How can Instrumentl help take you to different opportunities that might be a fit?
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. So we're going to jump right in here. Quick overview of all the things we're going to go over in the next couple slides on how Instrumentl can help you specifically with federal grants. We're going to talk about how you can find federal grant opportunities based on specific and selected search criteria. We're going to talk about how you can find the actual RFP announcements that you're going to review online using the great tips that Rachel is going over today. We're going to talk about how Instrumentl can help you track and maintain information in one place, and then other fun features that Instrumentl has, such as email updates and all of that good stuff. So with that, I'm gonna hop right in. So something I love to share to kind of start off talking about Instrumentl is the idea that Instrumentl loves efficiency. I would actually say, and people have heard me say this before, but we're an efficiency obsessed team. And for something as tedious and time consuming as federal grants, we really, really strive to make it as easy and efficient as possible to find these opportunities and then to manage them. Because as we know, there's so much more that comes to grants than just finding them. So to zoom out a bit, Instrumentl at a high level, we're saving people on average 3 hours every week on their grants process. And we're increasing grant output pretty substantially within the first year of using it by 78%. So how exactly do we do that? I'm going to go over a couple of slides, so bear with me, just to give you an idea of what this actually looks like. So to begin, Instrumentl is a prospecting, tracking, and management platform for all things grants. So we're bringing all of those things to one central place. So this means that, everything that you're doing when it comes to grants sits underneath one little umbrella, and it's all in the same place. So you don't have to use a bunch of different spreadsheets, websites, all of that. It really does live in one spot. We have over 12,000 active grant matches on our platform. So that means that if you see an opportunity on Instrumentl, it's available to be applied for. We're also, we send weekly updates on deadlines and new opportunities, which is kind of like having a personal assistant that kind of sits in the background and works for you 24/7 on finding good fit opportunities for you. Also, specifically for federal grants, as you can see with the little orange arrow here on the slide, you can see that you can filter your matches specifically for opportunities for different funder types. So in this case, you can see here, I'm filtering for federal government opportunities. And from there, you can find the actual RFP announcement, which we'll talk about here in a second. All righty. Of course, once you find good fit opportunities for your organization, the prioritization and the evaluation process becomes the next hurdle to really overcome. And it can be a pretty substantial time suck. So what we do for federal grants is that we make it easy to click into a funder's website, as you can see here in the left image, and the main document for the grant opportunity that you're looking for, as you can see here on the right image. And from there, you can find the actual RFP announcement. And then, like I said, use Rachel's amazing tips that you'll learn today to review it offline. I also want to mention that this is specific to federal grants. Oops, jumped ahead. For other grant opportunities, we actually have the RFP information directly on Instrumentl. So there's no need to click into the funder's website to access this really important information, although you still have that option. So for people who, really rely on digging through 990s to get a better idea of who a funder is, what we do is we use some really awesome visualization tools to just simplify all that information for you so that you're able to look at it very quickly. So for example, what you're looking at here on the slide is a couple of examples of this. The top left is showing you the average and median giving for this specific funder. So really quickly, you can see what they're giving every year. On the right, you can see the geographic focus area, so we can really dig into a deeper understanding of what organizations this funder is giving to in certain geographic locations. And then on the bottom, you can also look at information on competition. So how is this organization prioritizing new grantees versus past grantees, all of that good stuff. So essentially, again, what we're doing here is we're taking all of this multi-year data that you want and you typically can find in 990s, and we're just really simplifying it so that you're able to decide quickly and easily if you want to pursue an opportunity more. All right. And then, of course, once you actually decide that an opportunity is worth pursuing, there's the need to actually communicate all this information within your team and, make sure everyone is on the same page and you're able to collaborate efficiently if you have team members. So assigning tasks quickly and making sure that your team has all the information that they need in terms of like notes and documents is very, very important. So whether that's, docs containing research notes, RFP review notes, whatever it may be, all of this information can live on Instrumentl, as you can see here on that bottom image with that other orange arrow. And on the top image, it's actually very exciting because this is our new task view feature, which allows you to view all of the tasks that you have associated with a funding opportunity in a very seamless, easy way. And finally, of course, whether you're in the application phase or once you get to a post-award grant phase, you want to make sure that you're tracking all of those deadlines and tasks, et cetera, that are associated with them as quickly as possible, and really see, what's coming up and what's on your radar or what should be on your radar. And so Instrumentl is allowing you to stay organized, whether that's through like a traditional tracker that you see on the back image. You can see everything from the owner of an opportunity, the deadline for that opportunity, what task is coming up next for that opportunity, whatever it may be. There's a traditional tracker that we have. We also have, in addition to that, a calendar view like you see on the upfront image, which allows you to just visualize all of these things on a monthly basis. And then finally, I want to highlight our reporting tool, which is really awesome. It's that arrow in the top right corner of the top image. That is our feature that allows you to quickly take a PDF or a CSV file that you can then share offline with your board or put it into agenda meetings, and just share information with relevant stakeholders that you want to keep in the loop and that are involved in these grant opportunities. So all to say, that is my spiel on Instrumentl. I will say one thing to know, we did launch a couple of really awesome features recently, such as the task view that you saw on the previous slide. And so what we're going to be doing today is giving away 14 days free of Instrumentl. And I have a code here I'm going to drop in the chat, which is Rachel's code that you can use to set up your free 14-day trial. So you can go in there and you can see federal grant opportunities. You can also see these new tasks, task view, and other really awesome features that we have launched recently. So make sure to sign up today. I'll also send this again at the end of the presentation in case you miss it. But also want to mention that if you're interested in grants, but maybe you're not quite ready for a tool like Instrumentl, don't worry, we're going to have something for you at the end of the presentation. Like I mentioned earlier, we have some really awesome freebies. The first one is a funder decision matrix resource from Rachel, and the second is a 40-page guide to evaluating RFPs from Instrumentl. So maybe you're not quite ready for tools like Instrumentl, but you're still thinking about grants. You'll definitely want to stick around for that, so you have access to those. And with that, I'm going to pass back to you, Rachel. You're muted, Rachel.
Yep, I just realized that. Before we move on, I just wanted to see if there were a couple questions that I could answer. So Deanna, if you want to just call them out.
Yes. I'm gonna scroll back. Looks like we have a question from someone saying, what are the best practices for building a relationship with federal program officers and agencies?
Yeah, so I think that doing that before the award period or the RFP is issued is important, just because they're going to try to remain neutral. And so any questions that you ask will probably just be in response to the opportunity. And I think it is a good idea to get as connected with them as possible if you do get the award and beforehand, you just to find out, more about you being a fit and seeing how you can become more prepared. So I absolutely think it's a good idea to get connected with those people. And also, if you know other organizations who receive funding from them, gathering intel is always a great way to, see what you need to do to prepare.
Awesome. We have another question for you, Rachel. Is the lack of a certified audit or the inability to pay for one a red flag that an org can't financially handle the award when doing a grant review?
I would say that some of those are required for submission, so I'm not even sure if you would be able to submit your application, but I would say that if you can partner with another organization who might be in a better position to manage the grant as the lead applicant, that could be a way for you to be a subrecipient of funding, if you would be able to partner with them and receive some funding that way, and also get more experience on how to manage a federal grant.
Awesome. Awesome. A couple more questions. And then if your questions not gotten to during this Q&A section, we'll save it for later, just so everyone knows, because we're getting a ton coming through the chat. But a question for you, Rachel, do you have resources for federal grant administration or fiscal management?
Oh, there's a lot of resources out there. I think that's more of an offline question, because I would say, what specifically are you looking for? Because depending on the size of the organization, there are tools that can do things like time and effort reporting. And if you have a lot of federal grants, thinking about from an accountant administration perspective and just how you allocate your funds. And, also just from a project management standpoint, there are various tools out there, just looking at Instrumentl as a possibility. But, I think that it would just be to assess, what are the needs that you have, and that would dictate, the kind of tool or tools that you would need to manage the funding.
Awesome. Awesome. And then one more question for you, Rachel, for this section. Do you think you should wait on contacting the department until you're absolutely sure that the RFP is a good fit for your org?
That's a great question. And I think that you definitely want to look at the eligibility requirements. You definitely want to do your homework and see if there's any information about who they've funded in the past, and anything that you can do to just to see if this might be a good fit. So, if you do partner with another organization, then I would think about having that conversation together with the program officer. So I think that I don't think it's a bad idea, but you certainly don't want to waste anybody's time. So I would say to do your due diligence in advance, just to make sure that, you're heading down the right path.
Awesome. Fantastic. And just so folks know, I see a couple of questions specific to Instrumentl, so I'll answer those by typing out a response there in the chat. And then if your question wasn't answered now, again, I'm keeping track of those on my end so that we can address them during later Q&As.
Okay, so let's move on then. Okay, so what type of federal grants are you looking for? Because I know that there's probably a lot of different areas that you want to fund for your organization, and there's a lot of different types of federal grants. So I'd be curious to hear that. Next one. So let's go through, the reviewer's checklist and thinking about, okay, so if I'm going to look at this notice of funding opportunity, this RFP, how do I know if it's the right fit? So let's go through, the various different areas within the RFPs that you could be looking at in more detail from a different lens. So I've organized this into 4 different areas. One is the narrative. This is actually where a lot of people focus their time. What should you include in the application? Where can I find information that's going to tell me how to respond in the best way? Financial, how should you develop your budget? And I would argue that you should be doing your budget the same time you do the narrative, because sometimes the budget's always the last thing that's completed. And I think that actually dictates how you should frame your narrative response. And so I think that that's something that should be done as early in the process as possible. Administrative, what are the unique requirements to consider for a successful submission? What are the things that are unique to this opportunity that you want to incorporate into your proposal? And also post-award. I'm going to put my post-award hat on again and say, what do you have to consider when administering the grant? And all of this information you can find in that RFP. You just have to know where to look. So let's go on, and I'm going to show you a couple of examples. So tip 1, it's not what you say, but how you say it. So, I think that it just jumped. Yeah. So the narrative is really what you're going to be quote unquote graded on, what you're going to be reviewed by the peer reviewers who are going to be reviewing your application. And so what does it tell you? So your narrative has to follow the layout of the RFP. It has to follow the headings. It has to follow the same format. There cannot be any deviations. You can't make it a guessing game to try to figure out, where is the information located. And you always want to take a look at the first part of the RFP, because it's almost like a summary, because it's going to tell you what the agency's priorities are. They're going to be using different verbiage that, are going to help you, understand the language that you should incorporate into your narrative, and also the weighted criteria, because the criteria is going to tell you, how much focus areas you should be putting on certain areas versus others. So if there's a greater focus on the statement of need, and that's 30%, you're going to focus on that a little bit more than perhaps your strategic plan, which could be 5%. So just making sure that you're looking at that as well, and the compliance. Did you answer questions to the fullest extent? And also there could be some special prompts for things like special designations, like if you're a tribal government, if there's an opportunity zone or other types of things. So you just want to make sure that you get all those extra points, if you will, as possible, that could help, add to the success for your application. Okay, next slide. And I'll show you this as an example. So this opportunity is the SAMHSA Certified Community Behavioral Health Clinic Improvement and Advancement Grant. So this is taken directly from the language in the notice of funding opportunity. So this is on page 8. So this tells you exactly the criteria. So, and the thing is that if there are specific links, click on those links, because that's going to give you more insight into what you should include and how the language could be included in the narrative, how that can really help develop your proposal, because you're using their talk. You're using what they are, their language is to explain the situation, explain the case statement. This is how you want to incorporate that into your proposal. Next slide. And then this is another, there's some more information taken from the notice of funding opportunity. So these are the activities of what the agency wants to see. And you can see, I'm calling them the Easter eggs, of how they're evaluating the different sections. So you can see that there's all the required activities. So this is in response to, as you can see here, section 5 of this NOFO. So you can see what they're looking for. So it's telling you right there telling you the number of unduplicated individuals, and you need to respond to that specifically, telling us we are serving this number of unduplicated individuals. And so just making sure you're responding exactly and not adding extra fluff if there's a certain page limit. I know for this application, there's only 10 pages, so you really need to be very concise with your language. And then the evaluation criteria. So you need to be able to respond to that, evaluation criteria, and that's usually based on, what the requirements are in the project narrative. And so just make sure that you're looking at those in more detail. Next page. And so this is a different opportunity. This is an NSF opportunity for accelerating research translation. And so you can see that sometimes they're written a little bit differently, but it's a similar concepts. So this one is looking at the expected outcomes. And this is what they're telling you. This is what we want you to accomplish. This is what we want you to do to demonstrate success. And it's telling you exactly what they're looking for. So again, taking a look at what those expected outcomes are, because this is what they want to do. So those activities that you put in place and what you're doing in your narrative have to respond to these expected outcomes. And so again, it's a similar type of thing, but just, worded a little bit differently. Next slide. And also project description. This, I do like NSF and notice of funding opportunity, because they tend to be very clear and specific, and they always have links to other documents that you should be looking at for, additional review and, what they expect and formatting and things like that. So it tells you nearly everything that you need to know, And these all should be incorporated into your narrative. So it says this section is limited to a maximum of 15 pages, and you must respond fully to the project description. So it tells you everything. So all of your response must be A, context for art, B, capacity building and training activities. So all of the narrative must include these A through H and just how you're responding to each of those different prompts. Next slide. Okay, and so in some of them, this is in the NSF Accelerating Research Translation Grant, they'll sometimes include guidance within guidance. And I know it can be just a little bit frustrating because you're like, wait a second, I have to look at a different level of guidance. But in some federal agencies, they have sort of standard guidance for all the grants that are administered within that particular agency. And so just taking a look at that just to make sure you're not missing anything, because sometimes I have seen applications that have missed because you're looking at the surface level of that notice of funding opportunity, but there's actually another document that you might need to look at as well. So, and this is something that you could ask your program officer if you're confused, just to double check, because like they'll usually indicate, the name of the contact person that you can ask about these. So just make sure that you're not missing that piece. Next slide. Okay, now this is where the financials come into place. So financials, are really telling the financial story for your organization. So they tell you those clues on how you should spend the grant funds. They'll tell you what's allowable, what's not allowable, if there are certain things that you have to allocate in terms of post-award support, like if there are conferences you might need to attend as a recipient. And so that must align. So your budget narrative, and your narrative. So if you're telling a story in your narrative, it must be reflected in your budget, because that is going to tell you how you're spending your funds and how you're going to actually, complete the core activities that are outlined in that grant application. And also thinking about 2 CFR 200, because that is the grant guidance for all federal spending. And so just making sure you understand what's allowable, what's not allowable, because usually they'll indicate that the specific guidance that you should be looking at, for determining the allowable costs and filling out the standard forms correctly. So you have your SF 424, which is sort of the front cover, and then you have the 424A, which is a standard budget form. Next slide. And you can tell this because it says right here, budgeting and action. For the SAMHSA grant, it's the allowable activities. So it tells you specifically, what's allowable. And so when you're putting together your budget, make sure that you take a look at that, and that who's ever putting together the budget has access to that information, because they're going to tell you, you can't spend it on capital, or you can't spend only no more than 20% on this. And so they're going to give you information so that you can incorporate that into your budget and your budget narrative. Next one. And same thing here, for funding limitations and restrictions, you can see right here the specific information of, how you can spend your funds, and, the bullet points tell you specifically, like no more than 15% must be used for developing the infrastructure. And then no more than 20% may be used for data collection, performance measurement. So when you're putting together and figuring out, how you're going to be evaluating the success of the program, and if there's an evaluation component, making sure that it's not exceeding what the budget allocation is. And so this is why working between finance and the program office is really important, because it's going to allow you to understand how this, how the award should be administered. Next one. And here's another one from NSF. As you can see, the budget can, but is not required to include support for, and it gives you more information. So usually if there's those little prompts, it's sort of, you can spend your funds on this, but it's not required. So it's a may or a must. And so you can take a look at that just to see that, if there's anything that's unclear, you could always ask the program officer, but it does give you a roadmap of how you should be putting things together. Next slide. So this one is about beware of the shiny object. So I always call it like the disco ball, so shiny and everyone is obsessed with getting that new money. But then what happens if that turns into a ball of string where it keeps unraveling and all these compliance requirements are you need to follow. So this is why doing a risk assessment beforehand and making sure that if you're going to be partnering with different contractors or different subrecipients, that you are doing your due diligence and just making sure that you are not going to put yourself in harm's way by building a partnership with someone who is not going to be a good steward of funding. And also just, what are you required to do when you get the award, and how are you managing all these reporting requirements? So you can see that when we look into this guidance a little bit more. Next slide. So here's some risk assessment questions that you might want to think about asking. Asking about infrastructure to manage the award and the accounting system. So if you're going to be working with a contractor, include these things and doing your homework so that you can see, are they on the SAM.gov excluded parties list? And so seeing if they're barred from receiving funding or suspended. And so just doing your homework to see, do they have the infrastructure in place, the internal controls that adhere to the 2 CFR 200 requirements, and also things like, financial management and integrity. So those things need to be understood before you even move forward. Next question, next slide, sorry. And so 2 CFR 200, you probably heard me reference it before, it's the Uniform Grant Guidance. So that serves as the code of federal regulations and official guidance for the administration of all federal grant awards. In addition to that, there could be other layers like state agencies, local government, federal agencies might have their own additional requirements that are usually included. And those are going to be in the terms and conditions of your notice of grant award, and also in the notice of funding opportunity that you must adhere to. So it's just about what do you need to comply with, and making sure you understand all of the different layers that you need to be following. Next slide. And so you can see here that these are the compliance and action. So this is included in the notice of funding opportunity for the SAMHSA grant. So you can see the administrative and national policy requirements, and also just, what you're supposed to do as a recipient. So you can see the information about what's included in the notice of award or notice of grant award, and the reporting requirements. So if you can't meet these different compliance requirements at the onset, you might not want to even consider going after this funding, because you may not be able to manage all of the different components. Next slide. And also, here's for NSF. So, thinking about the links and the post-award requirements. So here you can see, as I said, click on all those links and make sure that you know what you need to do, what your responsibilities are to manage that funding, and not just going after it. And so there's a lot of different things that might be required, especially, thinking about NSF. The principal investigator or the PI, there could be some more specific things that they need to do to manage that funding. And so just making sure that that person knows what their role is and how they need to be responsible and being a good steward of that funding. Next slide. Okay, so you just also don't want to get pushed out if you didn't follow the directions. So one of the things I strongly encourage is that you're not the only one reviewing that RFP, and that somebody else is helping with just some of the different details, because there's a lot of different components. And usually what we do as a team is put together a task matrix with all of the different things that are required as indicated in the notice of funding opportunity. So it could be just silly things, but they're really important, like the formatting requirements, the number of page numbers that you are required to have, and just all of the online portal, that it's all working. Because sometimes what happens is that even though you have your notice of funding opportunity, you can click on the portal and then see, oh my gosh, there's more requirements that we did not know about in advance. And so you don't want to get into that situation. So doing your due diligence and setting things up in advance is really important. And also seeing if there's any technical assistance webinars or pre-solicitation calls or FAQs that you can gather more intel. And, if there's any questions that come up, because you can also get a sense of how other people are thinking about these opportunities, and they might have similar questions for you. So just keep in mind and look on that agency's website just to see. Okay, next slide. And you can see some of these administrative requirements is indicated in the notice of funding opportunity. So sometimes there's a useful checklist. I know this SAMHSA grant specifically has a very helpful checklist at the end. Sometimes you might need to create your own. And so that just shows that you're, doing your completeness check, that you have everything in place. Next slide. And then also just, telling you where to submit your application. So there's two different ways that you can submit this application for NSF. For proposals, visit grants.gov. You need to follow these protocols. And then via research.gov, you follow these protocols. So just whichever format you use, whichever way, it's just important to just know that you are following things as they need to be submitted. Okay, so we're going to finish up with the go, no go, and then some key takeaways before I take some questions. So the go, no go assessment is really important. And, yep, you can keep going. So this is, just a kind of quick and dirty. There's a lot of different assessments out there, and I've included some at the end as resources. And, it really are the key criteria for deciding, should we go after this? Should we not go after this? How should we, kind of determine what the best fit? And these are just a handful of different indicators that you can think about when deciding whether or not to apply, but there's many others, and there's some that you probably want to think about that are specific to your organization. And so just having this be a collective effort, so that if there's any question about, well, why didn't we apply for this? You have something, a set of criteria, a standard document that you can use to reference with other people. Next one. And so here's, as I said, some links to other tools, and even Instrumentl has one. So definitely, take a look at these, because these can also be helpful for you. And so as we finish up, just some key takeaways are, really understanding, how your organization would use the funds. And so that's why the go, no go assessment is important, because federal grants are a huge undertaking. So you just want to know that you're applying to the right one, and reviewing that RFP with a fine-tooth comb, and also colorful highlighters. Or you could, if you're a digital person, maybe highlighting it in different colors and sharing it so that it's accessible to other people. And don't apply if it's not a fit. You really can't make something fit if it's not going to work for your organization. And always start with the budget and working that into the narrative as much as possible, because that is really telling a cohesive story and making sure that you can complete those post-award requirements. And, the more that you can engage with the federal program officers in advance is always a great way to go, because it shows you're being proactive and you're really thinking about it. Next slide. So with that, here's my contact information. If you want to email me, connect with me, I love learning about, different opportunities that you might want to go after. And this is something that I know that we're really passionate about, is doing the due diligence in advance so that you can be as successful as possible. And so with that, I'm just going to open it up to questions.
I have a list here of questions that were popped in the chat earlier, if we want to start with those.
Mm-hmm.
And then stick around, folks. We will be going over freebies before we end the workshop here today. So stay tuned for that. Okay, first question for you, Rachel. When looking for capital funds, is it a requirement to get local or state government funding before seeking federal funds?
I mean, you want to look at different opportunities, of course. I would go for what is the best fit and what do you think you would have the greatest success. I do think that looking at local or state is probably a good way to go before going into federal. And I would also, I'm curious because in terms of capital at the federal level, it usually is aligned with something else. So I would just be cautious about, because sometimes getting federal funding for capital can be a very huge undertaking. And I'm dealing that right now with an organization that received money through HUD. And so just being very careful about that, because anytime you get capital for government resources, there's a lot of strings attached to it.
Awesome. Next question for you. In your experience, are new organizations typically eligible for federal grant money?
New organizations, meaning they don't have a track record. This is where I would say that partnering would probably be your best chance for success, because if you can't demonstrate that sort of ability to manage federal grants, if you don't have internal controls that showcase your ability to that demonstrate your effectiveness, it might be flagged as a risk.
Fantastic. Okay, next question. So if the criteria checklist in the grant application have a gap in what is being requested, we need to make sure we capture both on the application. So this is like a check for understanding.
Yes, yeah, because sometimes what happens is that in the portal, and I can't tell you how many times this has happened, it's incredibly frustrating that we do our due diligence, and then when you go into the portal, there's a new requirement pops up that wasn't in the notice of funding opportunity. And sometimes you can, I would always reach out to the program officer to confirm any requirements that are not indicated, because sometimes there could be a discrepancy, and that could be included in the FAQs for all participants, or it could be something that was technical glitch. So you'd always want to make sure that you're not missing anything. And because if you can't submit the application because an application requirement wasn't met, then that's going to be all that time wasted.
Definitely. Fantastic. Next question for you. What are your thoughts on the pitch portal for NSF grants? I was told they want to pitch first in their portal, then they will lead you to a grant to write a proposal for based upon your product or research.
Pitch portal. I'm not sure I know what that is, the pitch portal.
Okay, whoever submitted that question, if you want to put a description in the chat, we'll move on to the next question for now, but hopefully circle back to that once we have more context. Okay, next question. How much knowledge would you say of a specific field is necessary to be successful at government grants?
Oh, that's so hard. I think a lot of it is, obviously you need to have a strong concept that demonstrates that you're going to meet the criteria as indicated in the notice of funding opportunity. I think that there has to be an understanding of demonstrating that success. And so I don't know if it necessarily means that you need to have 100% technical competence, but it's more about being able to put together a proposal that accurately reflects, and meets the criteria that they're included. So I've seen some that are new to federal grants that have been recipients, and others who have, received federal funding before who have not. So I do think having a track record does help. And so that's why if you're new, perhaps aligning yourself with somebody who has a strong track record can really be beneficial to you.
Awesome. And it looks like Veronica posted a little bit more information about the pitch portal. So just to read out the comment there, I didn't submit it, but it's a new format to send a concept for a project, which will be responded to by relevant program officers, as opposed to sending random emails to ask for a discussion about, or for a discussion about it.
Hey, it doesn't hurt. That's new to me, so I'll have to investigate that further. So I don't think I could comment on it because I'm not as aware of it.
Awesome. And then last question here. Can you share a little bit more on your experience with working with lobbyists or advocates who can help navigate the federal/state grant process?
That's a little bit different, because sometimes then you're getting into earmarks. So I think that it depends on what it's for, because I think that I've definitely seen it be successful, especially in advocating for certain causes, especially the local government level, I've seen that a lot. And so I think that that's definitely something where that could be very beneficial to your organization. So I think that you want to be very clear about what are they lobbying for? Are they part of a larger association that you're a member of? So thinking about from a number of different angles, and are they looking at funding for something specific? So I think that it's probably something that not everybody can be afforded that opportunity, but seeing how you want to, what you want to gain from that.
Awesome. Awesome. All right, we're going to wrap up the Q&A section and move it into the freebies really quick before we wrap up. If for some reason your question wasn't answered today, you have Rachel's contact information here, as well as my email was posted in the chat if you have an Instrumentl specific question. So please reach out if we weren't able to get to that. Before we chat about freebies, I want to share one more time the link to create a free 14-day trial of Instrumentl, so you can really take all of this incredible knowledge that you learned from Rachel here today, find some federal grants, and then feel confident deciding if it's an opportunity that you want to, move forward with. So there's that. And then last but not least, I want to share with y'all how to actually access these fantastic freebie resources. As promised, we're giving away 2. We have Rachel's funder decision matrix, as well as Instrumentl's ultimate go versus no go grant RFP evaluation tool. Rachel, if you want to speak a little bit more to your resource, in the meantime, I'll pop a link in the chat for folks to fill out to access those.
Sure. I mean, this is just a tool that can, help you decide, what it's part of the go, no go. So, whether to decide to pursue a specific opportunity, it's not necessarily just related to federal grants, but just something in general that you can modify based on what is important for you and the relevant factors that you want to consider when deciding whether or not to pursue an opportunity.
Awesome. Awesome. So make sure to fill out that form that I popped in the chat. Should take just a minute or so and you'll get access to those 2 resources. Last but not least, if you enjoyed today's grant workshop with Rachel, you're definitely going to love our upcoming partner webinars, which you can register for through our grants calendar, which I'll pop the link into the chat for. And with that, before we let everyone go, just want to take a moment to say a huge thank you to Rachel for sharing today. Also, huge thank you to everyone in the audience for tuning in today, asking really awesome questions and just being super engaged throughout Rachel's presentation. We hope you enjoyed today's partner webinar. Rachel, any last words from you?
Just try to do as much planning as possible when you're going after these federal grants. I know there's a lot of questions, and so always make sure that you'll be able to manage the funding if you receive it.
Awesome. With that, thank you so much, everyone. We hope to see you soon and have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Okay.